Hello, my name is Aaron Henry, and today I'll be acting as a Arkansas Department of Environmental Quality Health Specialist, and I will be discussing the potable reuse of wastewater and its efficacy in Arkansas. So what exactly is potable reuse of wastewater and how does it fit into our society? Well, there are two different flavors of potable reuse, DPR and IPR. IPR, or indirect potable reuse, looks to recharge water sources. So if you are drawing water from an aquifer or a lake, you're using that um, wastewater and you're treating it and then injecting it back into that aquifer or lake to recharge it so that you're not losing as much into environmental factors such as runoff and evaporation. Direct potable reuse, or DPR, looks to inject the water directly into the water supply. Um, there are two examples of DPR and IPR in our country. A good example of IPR is in Cloudcroft, New Mexico. It's a DPR system, but is used indirectly. It's to address the needs of tourism in Cloudcroft, New Mexico. It actually has the nation's highest golf course at 9,000 feet, and it's hard to get irrigation for a golf course 9,000 feet up. And before they were trucking in water, which was expensive. So they implemented the system to address their irrigation needs mainly in the city and has actually worked with great success. In Big Springs in Texas, it was the first in the U.S. to utilize direct potable reuse. It's in both Big Springs and Wichita Falls. And as you'll see, um, they use different processes due to differences in their water sources. So if you look at it, Wichita Falls has more brackish water, so they have a little bit of higher salt content in their water, and so they need to address that differently than, say, Big Springs, which has less brackish water, and they just need to clean their water at a very basic level. And both of these, another thing you'll find, especially in the public perception, is that both of these towns were under intense pressure in terms of drought conditions. So Cloudcroft, you had to irrigate that, otherwise tourism were going to suffer. And in Big Springs in Texas, they're going through a long drought, and they needed a way to address that drought. And so it was a lot easier for their public to accept and really take hold and support these systems. Why do communities need wastewater reuse? For the most part, people consider a solution for communities in need, and for the most part, those are located in arid and semi arid conditions. It also helps with supplementation of water sources in drought conditions. It can also help with environmental concerns from water effluent. It can help with energy conservation through the consolidation of wastewater and water treatment plants. And in terms of Arkansas's need, it can help with agricultural irrigation, drought supplementation, and environmental concerns, especially when it comes to erosion or releasing stuff into the environment that would adversely affect the biological habitat there. The biggest obstacle, other than obviously funding for DPR, is the public's perception of the project. Um, that a lot of times the public will look at it from toilet to tap, like they're drinking what they flush, which in some ways is true. But if it's not properly recognized and addressed from the get-go, it can get away from communities and lose public support quite quickly. This past month in Tampa, a wastewater reuse program was put on the back burner after questions arose from the safety and efficacy of the program, despite other examples in this country where DPR has been used effectively. So how exactly is wastewater treated? It really depends on the region and the source water where it's coming from. So it really would be a case by case basis based on what techniques are used and why. But there's a general way water is treated for the most part universally. Water comes from a source, enters the water treatment plant, and then goes to distribution systems throughout the municipality, and then cycles into the wastewater treatment plant and is released into a stream or river in the municipality. DPR aims to sort of connect the wastewater treatment plant and the drinking water treatment plant to sort of create more of a direct cycle to mitigate loss from evaporation and erosion that you get from the streams. So how exactly is our sewage treated? If we are going to drink it, we have to understand how it's treated and how much it's treated in this process. The first step in sewage treatment is it is filtered through a screen that removes filterable solids and debris, so sort of the larger objects that get caught in the sewage system. Um, it is then put into a holding tank where chemicals are added to help separate suspended materials in the water, in the sewage. I guess it's sewage still, and help it separate and let it rest on the bottom so that you can pour out some of that water off the top and kind of skim it off the top. Um, the third step is where organic matter is removed. So they actually utilize bacteria in this step, which sounds counterintuitive because you obviously want to get rid of bacteria. But bacteria are used to help remove phosphorus and nitrogen from the water. So they use precisely calculated and formed bacterial flora in these tanks to help remove the nitrogen and phosphorus from the water and really get rid of that organic matter so that is able to be used in treatment and actually safe for the environment once it's released. There's also the fourth step after the third step is the further filtration of suspended solids, and this usually occurs through granular filtration or screens. So a lot of times you'll actually see them pass this water after it's been aerated through several steps of basically sand piles that will eventually filter out and capture some of that dirt and debris that you really don't want in the water. The fifth step would be disinfection. So when they do release the wastewater effluent into the streams, they disinfect it with chlorine or UV, and it kills up to 99% of the water once it's treated. But in wastewater, it's not so tightly regulated, so they don't always treat it to that 99%. But once it's released into the environment, it is safe for that environment. So now that we know that how wastewater is treatment, how is drinking water treated in our society? It's actually somewhat like the treatment of wastewater, but there's a few different steps that they use. The first one is coagulation and flocculation. So flocculating agents are added to the water, and these act as sort of a glue or a vacuum that sucks up all the dissolved particles in it. And these particles, once they are vacuumed up by this chemical, they really start to stick together. So it makes them heavier and heavier and they settle to the bottom. And so these are super long tanks that they're allowed to settle and they're able to drain that water off and leave the flock. Um, this water is then passed through further screens, such as like the sand ones, like in wastewater treatment, and then it is often just disinfected. And these basic steps are mainly for uncomplicated water sources, like the ones we have in Arkansas, where it's mainly fresh, not really high salt content, not really high lead content, but these steps are able to filter out bacteria and other nutrients that we don't want too high of in our water. So, in connecting the wastewater treatment plant and the drinking water treatment plant, most of the time additional measures for treating wastewater and getting it to drinking water quality are used. These are mainly safety reasons, but also they can be considered public a public relations aspect too, because if you overly treat the water to beyond safe measures. You don't want to hit the minimum of the safety requirement. You want to hit the absolute maximum water quality it can be. Then the public will most likely be able to accept this and hopefully have a better reception to the idea. These additional treatment measures are osmosis systems or RO systems, additional ultramembranes, so these would be not quite reverse osmosis, but pretty small filters, really small membranes that you wouldn't get with granular filtration. Also, disinfection measures could be uh, tweaked during this stage because of the membranes, so extra consideration has to make sure that chemicals aren't degrading these membranes. And so these are used to treat the water to higher quality so that people know that they're getting the best quality they can get. These water quality requirements I keep referring to are set by the EPA and usually controlled by a state organization. Um, Quality standards look at pH, bacterial flora, and they set limits for other minerals such as phosphorus, nitrogen, lead, and they also look at the turbidity or the color of the water. Um, Testing is required on the effluent to protect the environment at wastewater treatment plants and at the effluent of drinking water plants and throughout the different stages of the process to ensure that water quality standards are met. The implementation of DPR or IPR in Arkansas will require more frequent water quality testing at various parts of treatment plants. In the implementation in in Cloudcroft, New Mexico, and in Big Springs, Texas, because these were such novel ideas, they actually did require a heavier, more comprehensive testing with more frequent testing to ensure that because you were somewhat keeping these two in close proximity, you didn't want any cross contamination with sewage and drinking water, obviously. And so that would also be another public relations um, endeavor that you could take because it would be required by the EPA. But if you're standing there telling your citizens that, hey, we're going to be protecting y'all, we're going to be testing your water day in, day out, 15 times a day. That's probably a little too much, but just throwing a number out there. But if you're testing it day in, day out, making sure it's safe for them to drink, they will be more receptive to the project. So, how does this look in Arkansas? For wastewater reuse, it's really not so much about the we need water. We need it. We need potable water. It's implementing so that we prepare towns for drought. We can save energy costs of plants through consolidation. We can save farmers money along the way uh, through their mass irrigation. If we're not losing so much water, then we can retreat it and send it back out there at good quality so that they can irrigate their crops at a cheaper price. It would be an investment from the get go and it would cost money, but in the long run, you would see some serious results. Also, to implement this DPR, like I've harped on through this entire presentation, it would take a very substantial public campaign to raise awareness about the benefits of DPR in the state. You'd have to reassure your citizens from day 1 to day 2 to day 3, all the way through, that you were there to protect their water quality. They're going to be getting better quality water, not the same level quality water because it will not be as receptive to that. You need to give them better quality water from the implementation of this project so that they can buy in and accept um, and they can accept the DPR as not so much a toilet to tap, but a really great tool that Arkansas can implement. These are my resources that I've referenced throughout my presentation. Thank you for listening.